All right. I think we're recording. Yes.
Train coming. Train coming.
Yeah.
It's going to interfere. They're very loud.
I can't hear it. Anyways.
Oh, you will.
Okay. You want to wait or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So we're desperados waiting for a train.
Yeah.
Today is June the 4th, I believe. Thursday, I know that. And
It is so.
welcome to another edition of Red Thunder, the podcast that puts the cast in pod. Doesn't even make sense. But anyways, okay. So, um, bloodlines. What can you tell us about how the bloodline system works? And we'll just take it from there.
Okay. Well, there's two things you got to look at. Uh, for example, in the United States, they go by blood quantum in relation to Indians,
I've
and
heard the
I think
term.
it's yeah. I think it's yeah. It is. If you're quarter blood, and they'll know because they keep track of bloodlines. Uh, you're accepted as an Indian. You know, you'll carry a card and all that. Now up here, it's similar. Now, the blood quantum factor, for whatever they're trying to base it upon, uh, they they believe by their law they can terminate because of the diminishing of the bloodline. Now they go that's blood quantum. Because I'll tell you right now, whether you're in the United States or you're in Canada, they keep track and they have kept track of the bloodlines of Indians ever since they introduced the first reserve, wherever they, destroyed the people. So they have record, both levels, the provincial and federal. Now they say all mixed bloods or half breeds, they're under provincial jurisdiction. Well, that's not contrary to the United States. They have their law. The Indians there are under second law, so it's harder to challenge. Up here, it's easier to challenge because in their own, for example, some years ago, I ran into a fellow here. I heard he passed on, but he had a book. I was educating them and also talking to the judge for them in a court. He had a book of law. It's pretty thick. It was old, very old. And he said, Lester, go through this. So it's primarily all the convictions of Indian people in the past, and there's quite a few of them that were, it was determined that they were Indian. Now, one case really caught me, and this is it. This man, I forget what his name was. He was a trapper all his life, hunter. That's how he lived in a bush. Now, uh, he was he was biologically of mixed blood. They couldn't determine what because he didn't speak English. But he was charged with trapping out of season, trapping and selling the furs illegally, whatever. So he goes to court. Now, this case is unique. So he can't speak English, he's got to have an interpreter. So the judge asked him, said, how do you make a living? And he said, in the bush, Sarao, the bush. So then the judge says, how do you eat? He said, Musak, we buy you a suck of Samusak, deer, we old deer. He started to name them. And I was kind of paused there. I thought, oh man, this is interesting. So next, the judge said, what other foods do you eat? He said, me and suck berries. Starts to name them. So Saskatoon, not Saskatoon, down the line. So he asked him, said, what other solid foods do you eat? So he mentioned wild turnips, stuff like that, turnips. Now this is all recorded. So the judge said to the prosecutor, he says, uh, "This man has got to be released. There's no charges pending. This man is an Indian, and sir, we can show that he is mixed blood." He said, "I've determined he's an Indian." That was the end of it. Got it? So that man stood his ground, his bloodline, his way of living, how he grew up.
What do you suppose his bloodline was that the judge determined that he was an Indian?
It, uh, he said it by his lifestyle alone. It
Okay.
shows. And he couldn't talk English. Well, who taught him his language? Do you have white people? I don't think so. You see what I mean? So where you could say that becomes law, whatever. It's just a case. You know, it's case law that I was looking at. So that was one of the determinations by that judge. So that reminds me of the other judges down south. Judge Warren Erbaum.
Mhm.
Sometimes you'd understand they are honorable, and what makes them honorable? They can't dispute what it is that for example, what that man was saying, indisputable. So that's what I mean. Now, bloodline. Now, what I know from Meredith's teachings, and when I think back on my own life experiences before being kidnapped, um, I always saw no Gumpan. She was the Gansko, or we'd say the Ganoktago, old woman. She was first.
Mm.
My cousins lived around there. We had they had four daughters. Her and the Mashompan, their grandfather. Now, those four daughters, my mom was the second oldest. Now, so we look at that bloodline, okay, from their time. Mom married old Magnus, my dad, Magnus. You can't get any more Scotch than that. Magnus. Now, he's a mixed blood. His father, Henry, was a August's son, mixed blood, half a son, married to an Indian woman. Like, oh, now, she was Emery's Cardinal. So I named one of my daughters Emery's Cardinal from around Saddle Lake area, good fish around there, north of Edmonton. So that area is where they lived. Now, this before this forced assimilation and everything, boarding school. Now, where again the bloodline goes farther back. Now, way back, I watched what they put out on your bloodline heritage sites, and they had one of my late grandfathers. I didn't know where he fit in, but they just said he was known as Horse. I looked at that, and it's my great great grandfather that married his daughter. So my own Muslim on that side was missed at them. He had no other English name. dismissed them. Now, so I want to stop here and give you another example in relation to the court and how they sometimes deal with this when they are somewhat aware. Again, Donald Fraser, he asked me, he said, what's your mother's name? I said, Agnes House. That's by marriage. She married Magnus, Agnes and Magnus. So, interesting. So, oh, by the way, Magnus, I looked it up. In Scottish, it means solid as a fort. So anyway, so now I looked them up. Well, on this side of my grandfather's, it was marrying Indian woman. My no home Margaret, my old grandmothers. They're all Indian women. Way back, there's one who married mixed blood. She was a half breed, or what they call them in them days, half breed. Because at one time, I got the document to prove it from their records that at one time they set up. See, they had the Treaty Commission to put all the injured people on a reserve and all that. They were sent out to tell a lie. For the mixed bloods, what they call the half breeds. Now, they show one of my great great grandfather, great 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 grandfather. They got his Indian name and my grandmother's Indian name, and they scratched them both out, and they were transferred to the Northwest to be registered, removed from the Indian record, and to be moved to the records of the Northwest Half Breed Commission. I checked out Northwest Half Breed Commission. They have to deal in international law. They had to deal in international law. Now, why? See, there's nothing in their authority that can determine who is and who isn't an Indian. So you look at that court case, that's what I'm thinking of when I'm telling you this. So when I looked at that, and I looked at the bloodline, it's all to the woman's side. Got it? It's like your home, I mean your mom, her mom. That's what you go by. So when that part's in order, then you're all right. See, some people they can't go back too far. It's sad to say. We can look at that. Now, let's go back to the purpose of keeping track of the bloodline. So, by their determination, they go by blood quantum. Okay? How much Indian blood does he have in him? Or she? Now, they have the records. Okay? So, I'm going to tell you this one. When I first got out of boarding school, and we went to visit my cousins on the reserve, Musquatches. So they're bugging me, after a few drinks, it was, you're not an Indian. You're a white boy. So just a minute. Some of them, we have the same mushroom. Two of them were twins. Some of them were uh, my mushroom, the twin, not my Kokum's husband, but the other one, Monazis, as he called them. Some of my relatives I was their grandfather, but the same grandfather. They're calling me down.
Hmm.
So I remember one time we got to that point where I had enough. So I told one of my cousins, I said, you know what? I know my Kokum is Indian. And so my mom's an Indian. And I know that My dad is a half breed, so he's half Indian. So I'm an Indian and a half. Don't be messing with me. You're just an Indian. I,
Well,
I bring that out after all these years. I thought, way back then I was pissed off, mad, drunk, and ready to punch it out. But
well, yeah, that's just like people just don't understand. They've never been asked the
uh,
question, or they've never been on the receiving end of an accusation like that, or they just don't know
yeah,
about the bloodline. And according
yeah,
to what you're teaching is that the women are the title holders, and the every clan is the same with the women are the title holders, and it follows their lines back to forever.
yep.
Now,
That's it.
I don't know this is a fact or not, and I might be criticized for it, but I was told that the Jewish people are the same. They were a tribal people back in
Yeah,
the time of Exodus and all that,
yeah,
and they follow the women's bloodline.
yeah.
Now, whether that's true or not, I really don't know. So, I
And
mean, it
I'll
makes sense,
interject here
though.
for a minute.
Okay.
See, I'll interject here. Meredith brought this to light. I kind of laughed, but he wasn't joking. He said the reason these Jews they get circumcised, that's to show that they are tribal. That's it. Because there came a time when whenever that decision was made, obviously it was starting to affect the clans, right? So that was the purpose of it, to show that they're tribal, they're of a tribe or a clan.
Yeah.
That was just the purpose of circumcision. Otherwise, if you weren't, I don't know. I guess that's a telltale
Yeah.
situation between man and woman. you know?
Well,
But
yeah,
that's what it was.
yeah, and there was a ceremony attached to that as
Yeah,
well. Yeah. So,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's yes. See, the oldest Bible in the world is an Indian Bible. It was dug up over here, and it sits in a British Museum of Archaeology finds, London, England, right next to uh, the Septuagint, which is the white man's claims to be the oldest Bible in the world. Bible means Book of Enlightenment. Now, you look at it came from over here, okay. Look at who it was written by. It was determined that the Indians here who had the written language, which we always had, there's several tribes that had it, as well as ours, Nihil. Now, so it was written in one of the Indian languages here, and it was also written in Hebrew. It's 2,000 years older than the Septuagint. Interesting. Now, that determination is telling you that Indian people were enlightened on more things than they even want to come to believe today. Now, the reason they had the ability to move around that way because of, again, it's a ceremony, a ritual, if you will, and they could move from one continent to the other in a very short period of time. So now, having said that, so a lot of people ask that, and the answer is unbelievable, even though you have the documentation. Now, going back to bloodlines with Hebrews, right in their language, their original language, and Meredith interpreted it. It's in some of his writings, and it says this in relation to some call the Almighty. It's both male and female. Now, it it has the Hebrew writing, and what it says is that the Great Spirit is an interposer. That's the female side. Okay. Now the other is the Great Spirit, male, but there's still one being. That's hard for some people to fathom.
It's hard for me.
Now, the interposer, all right, the female energy, power, the creator is a reference interpreted from Hebrew, creator. The creator sends as an interposer sends the Great Spirit, the male. Okay, that's where the law comes from. That's where it comes from. So the female side is sending the male. When I speak, I always always talk to the great chief. That's the old way, the real old way.
So I have to interject here. Do the great theologians of the world of many faiths, do they know this, or would it blow their minds, or are they hiding it? Or like I'm thinking of Thomas Aquinas, and can't think of anybody else, but
Well, I
right
look
open.
at you're right. Aquinas was more than intelligent. He was a threat. You know that? But I read about him. He was a threat. Many considered him a threat. Uh, there's others through time, who just spoke, and they're speaking of what they knew was a threat to the established belief of the would-be religion.
Hmm.
Was a threat. See, even in the text again of the Hebrew interpretation, the the teachers among them were also members of clans, and the grandmothers also determined who was the teacher. That's how the authority works. She was the law, or the women of that particular clan. They were the law. They determined because they're the ones that watch us come out of them and watch us grow up. And when they become no joyous, old women, they know. They know who's been a shit ass and who's been good with the law, living it. So that's a determination in itself. Now, going back to bloodline, see where the example of the Hebrew scholars being here, they were obviously sent here because right in their own writings, they're saying we know the tribal system because we know who we honor the interposer, the creator, and we honor the Great Spirit. And that's the interpretation Meredith got from their writings, Great Spirit. Now, so in time over here, I've heard it many years ago when I'm still kind of just waking up spiritually, and many years ago. But I heard one old man speak, in our way, and he referred to what we come to know as the Great Spirit, using English. He referred to that one as the Great Chief, the Great Chief. After all these years and understanding that one being, one is the Creator, one is the Great Chief. Now we're to live by that law. The women send their headman, chose a headman, to speak on behalf of her clan. So every clan has a headman, and every clan has a responsibility. Now, the bloodline determines, in the spiritual realm, it determines who individuals are. And in the spiritual realm I've been in, especially sometimes challenged, a lot of them asked whether my knowledge was valid or I was bullshitting. And when the ancients responded, a lot of them didn't want to be around me anymore. I'm not saying they sided with me, they favored me, no. We're saying the law is exact. So I felt good after all those times I was challenged to realize that Meredith had that ability as well. He had that ability to talk with the ancients. Now, so that's bloodline. Now, he's Eagle Clan. Now, he wrote some things about it. I've learned from others who are clan people who know bits and pieces of the responsibility. So anywhere over here or anywhere in the four quarters of the earth, there is, first of all, Raven clan all over the earth. Now, the Raven clan, there's a creation story with it. Like when I was visiting the West Coast, what did I see on top of the totem pole? Raven. So they're Raven clan. That's the House of Raven clan. Now, uh, traveling with Brother Harry, Nungholt, Belakula, he, I think it was Darlene or Danielle, she got him to make me one of these silver wristbands. He's an artist. I didn't know that. She just gave it to me as a gift. And I looked at it, and I know it's a raven, because they also, artists go by masters as well. There's a circle in that raven's mouth. I looked at it and I said, is that the earth? He said, yeah. He said the, the white man says in their mythology that they honor the raven because the raven is found all over the world. No, the raven is a messenger for the creator. Because we used to be able to talk to the raven way back when the bloodline was in order. They used to be able to talk to him in Europe, Africa, where the raven would go. The raven was a messenger for creator. That's how the tribes used some of the winged of the air messengers. Now, here's one that a lot of people who've been victimized or Christianized. Now, Noah. Noah was a man who lived by the law of the sword. In other words, they were, him and his sons, like his sons had big followings as well. So they used to attack tribal women. They would pregnantize them, and by their law of the sword, they could, when they had children, they could, by their law, patriarchal, kill the children and the woman, and they could, by their law, take possession of all that was hers, because the women possess everything. Everything belongs to them, all of it. Now, and now that was universal. Now, so in time, he was punished by our law. And it was the women of the clans who knew of his bad deeds and he was coming to destroy them. Well, they forced him by a flood. They warned him to straighten out. He was warned. Now, You know how the Christian Bible talks about it? Noah was talking to God, and God told him there's a flood coming, get ready. God, my ass. He was warned by the tribal women to straighten out. Now that's a command. And that's all together with the spiritual order. It is. So he builds he gets ready for it. And the flood does come. And he was on the waters for, I forget the time period, I got it in records someplace. Meredith is good with numbers.
Wasn't it 40 days or was it
Uh,
something?
they say it was 40 days, yeah. And he opened the ark. So he was forced to open the ark and surrender. And he signed the treaty. That's where the white people get Noah's Ark Treaty. And now the Bible says it was the messenger for creator was that white dove, white, always white. No, uh-uh, it was the raven. The raven came and told him, this will all stop. You sign a treaty and surrender. Now, remember again, that's one of the foundations of international law, one of the treaties. That protects all tribal white people against that kind of aggression and, got it, the male dominated type of patriarchal system. So, again, bloodlines. Okay, people tell you, and I've been told this in my travels, and I could get along with them down east, Anishinaabe people. And a couple came to me, they listened to me, then they came and talked with me. So we went outside, they had a smoke. They said this, in the back days, we had children go to the men's clan to protect the women. I said, well, it's time to straighten that out because it's going the wrong way, according to the law that I know. So I said, well, it's going to be hard to do. I said, yeah, because a lot of them believe it. You go by the man's side.
Hmm.
I know people in Winnipeg that teach it, the man's, and they're getting well paid for it. I won't say who, but you know them. So the disruption was caused by the white civilized nation in order to destroy us. They had to destroy the clanship. They had to destroy the bloodline. That's what it was. Same thing like in the area of economics. Meredith writes about it as well. He said, I had a somewhat similar experience, but he writes about it and he says, a white man just yelled at him one time. He says, hey, Quinn, the reason we defeated you is because we destroyed your total economy, the buffalo. And Meredith said, that wasn't what it was. No, they had what I call spirit hunters. They had their spies who spied on American Indian religious ceremonies, wrote about them. Some Indians talked too much about them, revealed a lot of things. So the central power of one of the most powerful people in this part of the world was the Plains Indian. They feared the most. By their own admittance and even some of their own writings of his story, not ours.
Hmm.
Now, so the way Meredith explains it is that the buffalo was the central spiritual power of the Plains Indians. Now, those spies, when they reported that, it's not the common guy that out there killing buffalo for the hide. No, they just, oh, money. Oh. So a lot of people by then you're descendant of white tribe, they're so despiritualized, they didn't even recognize anymore what an Indian was. Now, for some of them over here, who were sent over here by the Crown of England, who escaped the Inquisition trials, they were the descendants of the white tribes who were the sellouts, the ones who turned against their own tribal people and pointed out to the prosecuting attorney that they're a descendant of the white tribes that defeated the Romans. And the Romans were forced to sign a treaty. Remember, England was the second Rome. So the reason they could do this is because those white tribes, the sellouts, they sold their land titles back to the descendants of the Roman Empire, England, the Crown of England. It was considered the second Rome.
Well, there's
So
another bloodline there.
that,
There's a
there's
bloodline
no bloodline.
connection there.
No. See, what they did, they were sent over here. Now, Plymouth Rock, called Plymouth Rock. Well, when the Pilgrims arrived there, Meredith, again in research, he points out 1820, white people are coming here, but they're scared to come on shore. They stayed out in a ship, and it was freezing. It was winter, so they were welcomed in
Yeah, I think you're off
because
about. I think you're off about 100. Well, they came in what 16 something. The Pilgrims.
six, is it? Oh, 1602. Did
Yeah,
I say
yeah.
1802? No, 1602. You're right. No, so why they were welcomed here is because they showed the universal sign, the circle with the cross, not the crucifix, the cross, which means they're tribal people. That was the international sign to show that you were tribal. That was one of them. That's what it was. So they showed that. And they also showed a copy, Meredith brings it out as well, a copy of the Coptic Bible, which was distributed throughout the world way back in 451 AD. And they had all the ceremonies, rituals, everything written in there in the Book of Enlightenment, as it became known as later. So that's where they stole from the American Indian and other tribal people to bring forward what today we know as Christianity. So the bloodlines again, over here, when they were welcome, when they became stronger, they began to expand and they began to kill Indians. The same thing happened in Jamestown, farther south, the southern parts. The same thing. Now, if you look at the bloodlines of, for example, African people, now what they say, African American, some of them know, some of them don't know. Some of them reach that point where they're just like some of our people, where they become gangsters. That becomes their family, not their clan. You know, that's that's sad to say. But you know, then there's others who become like the white man today, politicians, all of it. Well, that's their choice. Same thing is happening here. What does that got to do with bloodline? No, by law, their bloodline will only be acknowledged when the clans decide that they're welcome back because they've committed treason to go and join a white civilized nation. It's for their allegiance. So they're no longer tribal. That's another thing you got to look at. Now, the bloodline again, the tribes have got to know that. The people who went to work for that government directly as members of their parliament, such. That's where, you know, when people celebrate Louis Riel Day and Métis stuff, I can't participate. I can't. You know, no disrespect for the guy, but he didn't know anything about law. He wanted to be a white man in his parliament and everything else. Spoke only French. So that's a determination by bloodline. He spoiled his bloodline. one thing I read about, he was 1/10 Dene. Okay. Also, when he was in Montana, he was trying to convince Dakotas, getting them drunk, selling whiskey to them, to join his cause, take back Canada. So a lot of the stuff, you look at it, and it's not to be judgmental. It's to look at it and have a look at what the bloodline. He killed his bloodline. I don't care who calls him a hero and says, I'm direct descendant from Riel. So where does that leave you
Yeah.
in a wide world with a law dictated by them,
Yeah. Well, I think
even determining what your culture is?
yeah, his bloodline would probably, I'm not an expert on that either, but it would probably go back to France,
Yeah,
by way of Bras Riviere. Um, and of course there was the British half breeds. They had their
yeah,
own community, and there was the French half breeds, of which Louis Riel was part of that,
yeah.
and they never got along until they,
That's right.
until they decided to join forces. They
Yeah,
shot and killed each other
yeah.
until they moved to Winnipeg.
Hey, you can't forget the Scots.
Well, Magnus, yeah, okay. And I think one of the Spences that came over, who was related to me, who came from the Orkney Islands, I believe his name was Magnus as well. Or I think
Yeah,
there was a couple of brothers that were the first ones, and I think one was John, and one, you know what, I should study my bloodline.
yeah,
Like I know where my mother goes.
yeah,
Um, she goes right up to northern Saskatchewan. Same with my dad but on his mother's side, I don't know very much, but
yeah,
they're up north as well. And at some point, some Spence came along and married an Indian woman.
yeah.
And I imagine that her bloodline went far back,
Uh-huh.
be into the mists of time, and
Yeah,
where there's no written record, but I guess the spiritual world would know.
yeah. That's exactly what it is. Where a lot of people could find out, but you've got to go to see somebody who knows how to communicate. Now, going back to what I mentioned earlier with Fraser, Donald Fraser.
Right.
Now, in that court session, when he asked about my mother, so I told him, and then he says, "Well, who was her mother?" I said, Marie Bruno, but she had my coconut Indian name. I didn't bring that out, but then I know what he was up to. So then he says, "Well, who was her mother?" I said, Martin Screw. He said, "Yes." It's a no English name.
Mm.
So he said, "Oh, and who was your father?" I told him. He said, "The research goes back to Scotland, back to the house there. They were good in the world of business and commerce, hired by the Crown of England to put together the Bank of England. Now, one of the houses came over here to map this country called Canada today. His name is Joseph House. He's in your Canadian history books as well." I said, "That's where the house comes from." I said, "I say that unashamed. I go to the mother side." He said,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, there's nothing to be ashamed of." But the point of it is, the bloodline goes to the mother side. He knew that, or he'd been instructed. I think probably Privy Council who know what constitutes a tribe and how it works. Not all of it, but enough to give him some feedback to talk to me. Now, so that's just an example how they can't bother you. Is they can look at the records and they'll see exactly what I'm saying in relation to bloodline. So they can determine blood quantum.
Hmm. Well,
See, they tried with that half breed thing, it didn't work. Now what are they saying by their law? Oh, half breeds are now Indians. Uh,
starting to look that way.
Street, yeah. Well, because now these half breeds are what they call Métis by their determination and by their, I would say, name calling. They now have determined Métis also can claim land. In other words, there goes Indian title. Every time they claim, they're
Well,
they're actually they're actually surrendering Indian title.
yeah. Well, this is
'Cause
let's end the discussion with on this note that though Louis Riel spoke French and he was a Catholic, somewhere in there was an Indian woman. Like if you go back east down the the Winnipeg River and up down the Great Lakes and up the Ottawa River, those French voyageurs, they were marrying um, Mi'kmaq women, Innu women, Algonquin
Yep,
women,
all the way
Ojibwe
across the
women.
country.
Yeah. So in that sense, Louis Riel has to have a bloodline, but he
Yeah,
became. Uh, they were raised Catholic. They're all Catholics, just like the half breeds were all Anglicans.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. That's it. So that you go back to that case where that judge knew, and he determined right away by saying you can't go to church on Sunday, be an Indian on Monday. So he knows something about tribal law. In other words, he knows what you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
We can't be.
Well,
You know,
this is a huge subject.
it
Um,
is.
we've been talking about a lot of things in the context of modern day, um, current political situations like court cases and whatnot, separating from Canada. Let's do some more on the bloodline discussion,
All right.
um, as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Let's leave the modern politics aside for a while. And
Oh,
Ecoso.
oh, look, some of it.
Uh-huh.